Hello and welcome to another edition of the OnPoint podcast. For those I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Scott Thompson, CEO at Acceleration Point, and I've been helping medical affairs teams turn insights into action. And I am so excited today. We have a guest that is a force in medical affairs. I want you all to meet Paul Minne. Paul, he's been a strategic leader for over 20 years in the biotech pharma space, on the forefront of, I think it was over 7 product launches spanning everything from neurology to psychiatry, oncology, rare disease, big pharma, small pharma. He's been there, right? Most recently, he's served as the National Senior Director for Field Medical at Neurocrine, where he's been responsible for driving that field medical strategy, building high-performing teams, but really partnering across all the global functions in order to really help medical achieve its potential and what it's here to do. He's got a track record from everything from growing teams, managing 7-figure field budgets, working at Sanofi, Biogen, Amgen, Eli Lilly, I think too, and really just this mix of strategic vision with hands-on experience is not something everybody has. So I am so excited to share him with you if you haven't met him yet. Buckle up. Today we are going deep on how medical affairs can move the needle on measuring and communicating impact.
Welcome to OnPoint, the medical excellence podcast where we talk to pharma leaders about how to build highly effective medical
Paul,
affairs.
welcome. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate that intro. It definitely is humbling to hear all of that at one time. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I'm very excited to be here as well.
Awesome. This is one of those topics where it's like a bad penny, right? It just keeps coming up. And like, how long we met each other, 10 years ago? 8 years ago?
Probably. Yeah. When I was right. Yep.
And one of the first conversations is, so how do we know what we're doing is making a difference? And this conversation just continues to flip. And I think we're getting closer as an industry. But before we get into your observations and experience in addressing it, can we just start with why is this so hard?
Yeah. And I think a couple of things come to mind, at least at the very beginning of our conversation. One of the big issues to me is that no one agrees on what impact necessarily looks like exactly. If you ask 10 pharma execs, you're going to get 10 different answers, right? Impact should look like this. It should look like that. There certainly will be common themes, but I think that at the end of the day, that's part of the issue is what exactly is the impact and where should they be driving the business, right? And maybe sometimes that even depends on big pharma versus biotech, new product versus one that's been out for several years. A lot of things are going to make that definition difficult, right? It depends on where you're coming from and maybe even what the need of that organization is today versus a month from now, it might change, right? So the impact is really, that definition can change. So I think that's part of it. One thing that I would like to suggest at the beginning of this is to suggest an impact definition. So medical affairs impact refers to variables and outcomes that demonstrate that progress or effectiveness towards a desired outcome, a strategic end result, for example, or improvements in diagnostic rates or shifts in treatment paradigms, patient outcomes, those kinds of things. And as opposed to the typical, we impact by seeing X number of KOLs, right? Because that's typically the answer you're going to get if you ask a bunch of execs, what's the impact? Oh, they do this with the KOLs, right?
Well, if I go to those same 10 execs and say, hey, what is the expected impact of your commercial team? They all give me the same answer, right? Go sell the stuff and increase scripts. But why do these same execs not have the same answer or consistent answers for medical affairs? And why isn't it so clear?
Yeah. I think it also goes with your question of why is this so hard, right? It goes back to that. So, and if I may just again take a step back and say, maybe what we should have called this podcast today, and how do we get medical affairs to be that third pillar, right? That's something that has probably been around for a couple of years now. In other words, instead of being a supportive or a service provider, we're actually alongside commercial and R&D as a third major force within the organization. So part of it's that. So the strategic influence of medical affairs, it can be largely hampered by budget, right? It can also be just the alignment of the company. It could be sometimes the negative perception of what medical does. What you were just asking me, like, why are we going to get tender? Some may actually have a negative perception of what medical is actually doing. Again, but it goes back to most would say supportive or provider of service rather than a driver of business and strategy and that patient value, right? We hear the terms of MSLing and art of MSLing, and that drives those relationships. Essentially, is what we're doing. We begin our impact at that point, right? And then, but how do you then translate that relationship part of what we do? Why is it so hard to show that impact? And I think the simple answer is because the MSL mandate is complex. It takes an awful long time generally. And traditional call metrics, if you want to call it that, don't capture the depth or really influence that medical activities have. And again, this varies by all those 10 execs, those theoretical 10 execs. Everybody has a different, what is that medical activity? Sometimes it just comes down to what the need of the organization is, how the product life cycle is, and if it's rare disease versus a primary care market. So there's so many things that come into play here. But anyways, I just threw a bunch of things out there. We're happy to put it all together, but I just wanted to, I think it's difficult to answer your question because it's not just a simple, oh, it's this, right? It's many things that I just listed.
Yeah. So, Paul, let's play a little game. Let's try something. Okay. So you're the CEO of a company. You are responsible for something, let's say, in the neurology space. Okay. And you are getting ready to launch your second product into the market. I want you to argue for me why you shouldn't have MSLs.
Should not?
Should not. I mean, because here's the thing, right? Like, executives and leaders keep asking, what's the value? What's the value? What's the value? But they keep bringing the teams on. They keep spending the millions of dollars. So they must inherently know what the value is.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I'd have to think about it. But I think what you just said is that if you're going to argue against it, it would be budget, right? It would be something to say, if we already launched a similar product in neurology with our MSL team, then we don't need them anymore. We're done. They've done their value, and this is just another add-on product or whatever the issue is. And so maybe we're trying to save budget. I think that's what you would argue, because you're right. They inherently know what the value is. It's just that showing it is what's the difficult thing to show that impact is that pie chart, that simple. And the thing is, metrics are easy, right? It's easy to say, how many people did you see? Or how many times did you get this data point in front of people? It makes a really cool pie chart or other bar graph. Those things resonate with senior leaders. It's just about a simple number. So it's difficult to do, though, in your scenario of, okay, we have this new drug that go out there. I think we all know what the MSLs do in that scenario, but you can't put it into pie charts. And that's, I think, where it becomes very difficult to express that and show. And even something as simple as a shareholder meeting, to even shareholders like to see the pie charts, and they all like the positive rate of climbs and all this kind of stuff of everything. And you can't do that, though, in a lot of what medical does.
So
Easy.
let's try something on, right? So I was with a group a few weeks ago and asked the question like, hey, in one sentence, what is the purpose? Why does medical affairs exist? Like, why does pharma pay to keep you around? How would you answer that?
I think the real value is what they deliver, which one is the scientific exchange of information, right? It's the gathering of insights. It's the deepening growing relationships that they create. And it's exerting that strategic influence, if I can use that term, maybe quote unquote influencer within your territory. But again, I think those things are intangible, right? And as we know, compliantly can't be measured using sales numbers, right? But at the end of the day, it's really about exerting that influence on those KOLs and HCPs and really driving patient outcomes.
Yeah. I think that I got to somewhere similar with them, which was like that inherent understanding that those leaders have is that MSLs have that relationship where they can influence. I think where the discrepancy is that they haven't spent time clarifying what influence we want the MSLs to actually have that's compliant for them to have. And so,
Correct.
what this team had gotten to, which I really like, is that medical affairs exists to change clinical practice for the betterment of patient outcomes. And that the way we do that is introducing new science, new evidence that changes the beliefs of what HCPs think about and the way they make decisions so that they do something different in practice.
Yes. Yeah. And I agree with that. I think, like I mentioned before, everything that medical does is over the long term, usually over years. And that is sometimes not or it's in contrast, I should say, to the normal business cycles and strategy plans and everything else. It's hey, we need this now, not a year from now. So all the things that you mentioned, if we're going to make changes to medical practice, clinical outcomes, can't do that with one call. And I think the other part of it is how we're directing our MSLs. We give them lists of all these things to check box. Do this, do that, get this information, I'll do that. And so when they're in the moment, they finally got that 30 minutes with somebody. In the back of their mind, like, I got to get through this and I got to get through that. And I think they miss a lot of times opportunities to really make a change, right? It's all about, oh, I have to get this in front of them. I don't know if I'm ever going to be invited back. I'm going to do it all, call it data dumping, right? I know most don't do that, but sometimes we revert to that because I've got to get this out. And my boss is telling me I need to have these check boxes by the end of the month, right? Unfortunately, again, that's easy to measure, but it doesn't show any impact, right? If you take a step back and you get into a conversation with somebody and they say, I think that's a great data point, and you're like, okay, and you move on to the next data point, you missed a huge opportunity. Tell me more. Why is this a great data point for you? Is this going to change how you practice? Are you going to share this with your residents at the meeting you have with them tomorrow morning? Are you going to say anything at the podium next month at the Congress based on what we're talking about? And if not, why? Why wouldn't you want to share? The dean's great. Why wouldn't you be sharing that? So I think we need to ask those kind of questions. We need to direct our teams to really look for that. And that's when I think that's when change happens, because that's the impact that we can really show is, hey, look, this guy went to this national Congress after us meeting with him several times. He's actually changed his mind on this data point. And we knew that before he was going to do that. And that's where it comes down to what you were just saying, which is how are we going to change or influence patient care? That's how. It's not just, okay, checkbox done. That looks good on the graph. Nice pie chart. You went through all this. Great.
So, if part of the challenge is that changing clinical practice, improving patient lives, takes a long cycle, what are some of the leading indicators, the KPIs, the things that you look at today to know whether or not we're heading down that right path?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. I see this a little bit here and there. Unfortunately, I think everybody falls back to the easy, okay, yeah, let's just look at how many times they met with people. But I think there are things that you can look at that measure quantity versus quality. And I think some of those go to some of the things I just mentioned, which is, do we see shifts in real world evidence? Do we see people at congresses actually using our data and showing it? And is it negative or positive light, right? Are there changes in literature showing that knowledge transfer is actually now on the page, right? that takes time, of course, right? That
Yeah.
things don't get published right away. Our care pathways within health systems happening. I think I'd always love to hear when someone would tell me, hey, I met with this health system and now they're going to add our protocol into their institution, right? So those are some things that definitely can help drive that. Even some things as surrogate endpoint tracking, such as screening rates or monitoring tests or protocol adoptions, like I mentioned, or even just decrease in time to progression, cure rates. These are things that obviously HCPs have maybe made behavioral changes, right? So some sort of surrogate endpoint that we can track. And then, like I said before, I think it comes down to the why. Why do physicians like this data point or not? And what are they planning to do with that? If as soon as the MSL leaves the office, it's completely forgotten about, there's zero impact there, right? But if you come back the next time and say, hey, Doc, we talked about this point, and you had mentioned that you were going to share it with your residents, how'd that go? Oh, you forgot to do that. Okay, hey, you know what, baby, I can come in and do that for you. So we're trying to get there as opposed to just, yeah, I met with this guy and I saw him for 15 minutes and I'm on to the next subject and I'm on to the next office because my metrics are so high that you forget to really concentrate on moving that needle. So I think my experience, I've seen when we looked at some of these things, endpoints, really diving deep and some of the other stuff I said, that is what really showed impact, but it's difficult to put that in a pie chart.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's interesting is we started with that we're here to impact patient lives. That's a bit of a long out goal. So we want to change clinical practice. That is also taking a lot of time. So we're focused on our people's beliefs and attitudes around science, data, decisions changing. And that led itself clearly, you've inferred it a few times, to insight generation and knowing are people changing their beliefs and why or why not. And so we can do something about it. And you're comparing that alternatively to what a lot of people do, which is counting the numbers, checking the boxes. How do those two work together? Are you an advocate of there should be no activity metrics, no check boxes to do, or do you find that the two work together somehow?
Yeah, I think that's really, I mean, it's really both. It's the hybrid model, right? And I think the future is really about doing both. And the way I look at it is there's certainly an expectation of work that goes around. Just having one meeting a month is not acceptable, right? We all know that you should get out in the field and really striving to see as many people as you can. And the MSL who's in a big city like New York maybe isn't getting on airplanes and things and spending a lot of time traveling, maybe can do more of that than somebody who has 5 or 6 of the square states in the Midwest and is constantly in line at TSA. But I think there is a level of expectation of we are getting out and seeing people and we are seeing them on a regular basis and we are getting these data points out there. Yes, so the metric part of it, the easy counts are definitely always going to be part of that. But what I argue is that doesn't really show the impact that we're having because it can be gained, right? It can be like, all right, I saw that guy. It was a 2-second conversation. I'm counting that. But if we really want to impact patient outcomes, I think we have to take a step back and look at all the other things that we can do. And so the qualitative of it, and qualitative it's subjective, right? Like you might be thinking this is a terrible podcast. And I might be thinking this is a great podcast. It's all about the subjectivity of it all, right? At the end of the day, we're all going to view different conversations differently. So even that is somewhat wishy-washy, but that's the problem, right? How do you take something like that and say, I've got a great relationship with this guy and sit down and talk with him for 3 hours and he's going to make all these changes and all these things, but how do you put that in a way that then senior leaders it'll resonate with, right? And we go back to what we were talking about before, we're going to spend all this money and then create another MSL team for this new product.
Mm-hmm.
How do we justify that with just, it's great. You guys have a relationship. So I think it comes down to embracing the fact that we need both. that we would maybe a little bit more on the qualitative and a little less on the quantitative, but I really think a hybrid model is where it's at. And I do see a lot of leaders talk about this all the time. And I think there's a little bit of a fear factor. And if we say, hey, you know what, we're gonna see 50 people a month, or we're gonna all these numbers or whatever. And if you don't reach that, you could be in trouble, right? You're gonna end up on some list, maybe even a PIP or something. So there's a little bit of a fear when it comes to numbers, a little less. So I think a lot of us will revert to, yeah, that's great. We can make those numbers, but what's really important is we have these great relationships. We're influencing decisions and things like that. Difficult to show. So we can say that, but in the moment, in the time when the C-suite is asking, what are you guys doing? It's so easy to put together that here's our numbers, right? And we forget to say, hey, you know what? Here's this impact model. Here's how we're really changing patient outcomes, because they have to read that. It's not an easy like snapshot of, oh, here's the needle moving. You have to actually read the bullet points because it's difficult to express it on a slide. So I think, anyways, I would say we need both at the end of the day. We can't abandon one and just go with one.
So I'd love to get your thoughts, and this isn't a topic we've explored on the podcast yet. So let's say we get to a point where we're able to articulate, hey, here are the 3 or 4 or 5 behaviors in practice that we are aiming to change, and that we've got data that shows earlier identification improves patient lives, or treating faster, or this particular method of diagnosis, whatever it is, right? And we have these behaviors we're trying to change. And we tell our teams, okay, you now have a mission of changing those beliefs, right? X% of your HCPs believe this today, and we want them to believe this in the next year, 2 years, whatever it is, depending how big the change is. Then we're going to track their change in that belief over time. How does that change how an MSL team has to prepare?
It's a great question. I probably need to give more thought to it, but I think it also starts with what we're asking them to do. Go back to what we were just talking about. It's important that we engage our thought leaders and we engage them in a regular cadence, but not stopping there. It's about perhaps utilizing things like that. If, hey, we want to show, let's take, for example, this new drug that came out, you want to have a diagnostic test done, or maybe something where it's not necessarily like a blood draw or anything, but it could be like in psychiatry world, it's a new test that we want people to do so that they can diagnose or monitor or whatever it is. And so you add that to that strategy. And to your point, okay, if we just say, hey, are you using this, doc? And okay, yes, no, and then you move on. No, it goes back to what I was saying. Well, we want to dive into that. Well, why aren't you using it? What is the problem? Oh, is it time? Is it money? Is it a needle stick that patients don't want, or whatever that is? And the thing is, when it comes to insights, what's cool is if in your scenario before, if you have an MSL team out there with one product and another product comes out, and maybe there's something different about it where there's a test that needs to be done, what you can do, and this is where like you can't even game that system, is you can say, hey, this new drug came out, this new data point came out on this drug. We can look back, say 2 or 3 years in our insights and say, hey, you know what, this wasn't even an issue back then. This wasn't even coming up. But now at this point, we can look forward and utilize those insights to say, hey, look at what this changed. And again, it goes back to where we have to ask the MSLs, you need to have this conversation. Like you have to put this as part of what you're asking, and don't just ask yes or no. Are you using it or not? Why yes? Why no? And that can actually lead to a further understanding, open up data gaps, right, in the science, where you can go back and say, hey, look, this came out, they're running this test or they're not. You can even say, hey, we'll take half of our KOLs. We're going to talk about this, and the other half we're not for 30 days. Then we're going to see maybe which way was better, right? We can look at those insights, analyze them, and say, you know what, when we had this conversation, people tended to actually then utilize it, and ultimately patients were put on product. We can't obviously tie that ROI necessarily, but we can look at it from that perspective. And if we didn't have that conversation, it seems really obvious they didn't make that change. But maybe it's not as simple as yes or no, right? Maybe it's more of a sliding scale of what they're asking to do. But there's a way that you can maybe even ask the team, hey, don't see your tier ones this month. Go see your tier twos and threes. We want to see how this affects how they change. Then we're going to go to the tier ones next month and see how it affects, maybe compare those two, right? There's ways you can look at data. You can cut this all this up, right? So anyways, in the time that I had to think about it, I think there's ways that you can direct your team besides just go out and see people, right? Because that tends to be what we do, right? Is, hey, look, we need numbers. You, both of you. But if we actually take a step back and say, hey, what we really want to measure is how this is being optimized in the field or how this is being utilized. Is there any uptake? And yes, why, or no, why? And again, you can even customize it that you're going to look at different avenues of it. If we don't say it to the tier ones, but we say it to the tier twos, is there a change there? There's just ways we can look at it. So I don't know if that's the best answer, but I know that there are ways that we can do this besides just go out there and see people.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, you've been with a lot of field medical teams. What is the biggest gap today? If you took on a team, any team, anywhere, right there, and just call it an MSL team and say, hey, we're purpose driven. We're going out to cause these changes. This is what we're going to do. What has to be put in place, right? What does that team need in order to be purpose driven?
Yeah. So I love this question, Scott, and you'll see why in just a second. So to answer your question, I think the main gap is moving from being seen as a scientific support education function, right? Measured by activity, to a more strategic data powered leader, that third pillar that I mentioned, that measurably advances clinical outcomes and doing it at scale, right? Not just these top 10 people out there, right? We're doing it across the board, across the country. So I think to dive a little bit deeper, so there's two things here that we utilize to get where we need to be. And this is where I get pretty excited. One, I think we need to embrace AI. Yes.
Okay. We're on there.
That's dude. Yes, and we're going there. And accepting, or even, like I said before, embracing that quantity measurements do not highlight the full value that medical brings. Okay, so let's dive into this, starting with AI. To ask you a quick question. So doesn't everything feel like AI is like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? It's just came out of nowhere instantaneously without any warning. I think it was 2023, late 2022. And all of a sudden it was everything we hear about it's there. Even movies like Terminator, Matrix, they all showed us to be afraid of the machines.
Yeah.
So I see that fear every day. People are just, oh, AI is crazy. I don't know what to do. And maybe they even think it's going to take their job, which it won't. And that's what I'm getting to here in a second. And the reason is because we can still pull the plug, right? It hasn't gone down to the Matrix level or Terminator level where, we still can pull the plug, right? So I think we're okay for a long time. But what's more likely to happen, and I think this is where we see a lot of the tech savvy folks, they're already leveraging the power of AI. And that is to be more efficient, gain that competitive edge, get back time, which I'd say is probably our most valuable renewable asset here, right? Or resource. The use of AI, digital engagement, whatever you want to call this, in medical affairs, we definitely lag behind what is technically possible, and that's required. If we want a rapid, personalized, adaptive stakeholder engagement, I think we really need to embrace it better. For field medical, especially, what this really means, this more time that we get is giving us the time to do the things we do best, influence others through science, impact patients in their care. Because what we're really doing here is, like I said before, I want to, hopefully this definition sticks. So like we're KOL and HCP influencers within our defined territory. So the reality is that AI is being baked into everything that we do every day, not just in our jobs, but everywhere we see it and across all professions. And medical is not immune to that at all. And let's face it, information is available everywhere, right? Anyone can find out deep knowledge of products 24/7, right? If you ask the right questions,
Yeah.
you don't need an MSL to, hey, how do you dose this drug in? Read all this efficiency. Yeah. How does this drug work again? Okay. Well, that all can be found out to Google, right? It has been for a long time. We don't even need an AI for that. But like any information, and this is where it's bad, is that there's a lot of misleading information out there. And I know that's probably a whole nother podcast that we won't get into today, but we know that it's not always correct information and AI makes mistakes. But so it's not an irrational thing for people to think, hey, this is going to take my job and it's not going to be good and all that other thing. But I think what the good news is that because we're human, we can still do a custom, tailored, genuine, authentic, warm communication that AI can't, which, by the way, MSLs are really good at. And we can provide that deep, valued conversation. And why? Because we're trusted, right? You can't necessarily, you're going to get from AI all the time. But if you've built a long-term relationship with people, you also have a lot of trust there. And that relationship that was built on that trust would, again, takes years. It means that I think, anyways, that the MSL role will become more important in in the coming years, and the art of live conversation that we bring, even if it's virtual, it, it is sought after. And plus, you can interpret tone, body language cues, facial expressions. They look confused or annoyed or happy. It's so important to us, right? So I don't think we need to be afraid of it, but I think we should embrace it and we should look at ways of really having AI supplement what we do. We bring so much to the conversation that AI can't.
Yeah.
And combining these two, MSLs and AI, we can have a huge force that we can't even imagine what we're capable of in today's world. So at the end of the day, we either do it now or your competitors are probably going to do it, right? And so I like think about AI, even whether it's with our jobs or personal. I think you have this Darwinian movement, if I can call it that, which is evolve or grow extinct. So we either apply it and learn it and embrace it, or like I said, your competitors are probably going to do it. So this may be another podcast subject, by the way, Scott.
Actually, let's play both sides of that, right? So let's start with, before we talk about the ways we can use AI, but let's start with that why, because I have a teenage son, and he was in a bit of a argument with his girlfriend, and he asked ChatGPT. He said, "Here's what's going on. Here's what happened. What should I say?" And it gave him, in my opinion, like the exact right words. This is exactly what you should say. So he said it to her, and she said, "Did ChatGPT tell you to say that?" What's the right? That doesn't go well in the MSL world, right? Given that these HCPs can get all the same words from the GPT machine, why is there still this human connection desired? Why do people want to still have an interaction? Why do we still have a podcast? Because we could have written this, right? With GPT. Why?
This is where you're going to dive into the psychiatry really deep, right? I think it's our human desire, right? We don't want to talk to machines and we don't want to have machines come up with the answers to everything. Again, if it's something easy, like what's 2 + 2? Yeah, sure. They can do it a lot faster than we can. And like talking about clinical insights, for example, it could take hours and not days to, like Net Zero was saying before. Hey, let's look 3 years worth of clinical insights. And then this data point came out. And how did that change anything, right? That could take somebody a long time to go through all those data points and figure it out. AI can do it instantaneously, right? So let AI do that. But it comes down to the prompts. It sounds like your son was probably really good at prompting it. So, because you can ask, and fun to play with it. Go into ChatGPT and ask it a very basic question, and then whatever it gives you, and then ask it the same question, but in a different way. Hey, I am an expert at this, blah, blah, blah. And it'll send you a totally different, it's the same question, but prompts that you're asking it. So in other words, I think, again, I go back to your question is, why do we want this? Because like I said, AI can't read your face. It doesn't get sarcasm. Right. It can't see that you're confused or whatever. You asked it this and it's going to spit it out to you. And it's all based on those prompts that you gave it. And so that's just cold. And again, if you're, hey, analyze this, and I'll give you a real world scenario, which I think this is actually, MSLs aren't doing this right now. They should be. A new article comes out, upload it to AI and ask it, hey, what are the 3 things that I should ask my tier 1 KOLs about this article? What about a tier 3 or maybe a different, like you have a neurologist versus a psychiatrist? You can ask it these kinds of things, like what kind of questions are they going to really want to, where I can drive the conversation? I'm not saying don't read the article. You should be aware of what's in there, but it will be able to point out these really quickly. This is what you should focus on, right? And this could be part of that pre-call planning. Here's this doc I'm going to talk to. Here's the bio from this doc. I'm going to talk to him about this article. What 3 things should I ask him? And you'll be amazed at what AI is capable of helping you. And so that's what I'm saying is, like, we should embrace it, because we can then take what AI gives us and humanize it, and we can read your face, and we can, I'm over his head, or he's bored, or he's looking at his watch, or whatever. All these things that AI miss. And like the girlfriend picked up on, right?
Yeah.
She picked up on this cold man. It's like, yeah, sure, it sounds great, but this isn't you.
Yeah. And I think that as I look at some of the best MSLs, they know that they can only push so hard because they only have so much data on, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you understand this? Do you believe this? I think the part that going back to some of the examples you used in the insight questions and the two-way dialogue is great. And how does it impact your life? Are you going to want to share this? Are you going to need to act on this? What's in the way of acting on this? And so I think that this ability to go beyond further explanation of the same data, right? And to be able to pivot to a more human connection of, great, tell me what you're going to do and how can we help, is a really big pivot point for the MSL.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I'd be curious if you could wave a magic wand and close this gap between activity focused, go out and have 1,000 interactions and let's make big pie charts out of that. You wave your magic wand and now we're saying, hey, you have a purpose of being here and it's changing clinical behaviors. These are the beliefs that we're trying to change. And you have this human to human connection, this opportunity to understand, do they understand and believe the data, but how do they intend to act on it and what's in the way? And if you could change one thing about how our medical teams operate today to make that happen.
Maybe if there's one thing I'd say, maybe it's the mindset of just accepting that the old way of measuring from 10, 15, 20 years ago is out the window. And instead do some of the things we've been talking about. Adapt to the technology transformation that's happening. Have a bold cultural shift within your organization to focus relentlessly on outcomes in everything you do, and put less focus on just the numbers game. More about, hey, we want, this is the outcome. And it's not just patients on our drug, right? It's awareness of the disease state. It's awareness that this test is out there to help you monitor or whatever. Again, it goes back to make medical affairs a cross-functional force, that third pillar, to help with measurable clinical and patient impact values there. If all this stuff was to happen at once, not possible, right? I think we would bridge the gap, but some industry-wide progress is going to take a lot to happen. Like maybe individual organizations could do it if they're small enough, right? To embrace it and say, hey, we're going to do everything different here. I see that a lot. Hey, we do something different. We're a different company. I think this should be part of it, right? If we're really going to do something different, let's not just follow the cookie cutter aspect of this is what medical does. But it is asking a lot, especially if you're going to do it all at one time.
Yeah.
A couple of pragmatic approaches come to mind. So I think industry leaders, they should recommend focusing on that, I don't know, directional strategy linked impact measures, changing in beliefs among HCPs, right? Going from that adversary to at least a neutral, hopefully an advocate. That's much harder to do, right? But rather than just looking exhaustively at tracking activity and all that stuff that we've been talking about, but really trying to make some infrastructure about how we can really make that impact and deliver on that. And what do we need the MSL team to do that? If we don't, if we just stick to what we've always done, what that leads to is MSLs just focus on getting the numbers, right? Quote unquote, but very little else. Sure, impact happens here and there because it's just good relationships and you have nice conversations and people are on board and whatnot else. But the overall feeling amongst the team is I just get my numbers. We really want to get around, like we want to get past that. So I go back to what I was saying, which is we really need to embrace that quantitative part of it. And as much as how easy it is to just revert back, stop, and just look at it from we know they're going to get their numbers, right? Because if you're doing your job, you're going to get all those numbers. It shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
If you're trying to really change the impact or make an impact by changing patient outcomes, all the numbers will happen anyways, right? Just automatically. And that impact that we're looking at, closing that gap, as you say, I think if we're going to wave a magic wand, we need to just move on and say it's 2025. So let's look at something different. And it's going to be unique. Rare disease is different than primary care. Some drug that's been out 5 or 10 years is going to have a different way of doing it than something brand new. So there isn't a way I can just say, hey, I've already just measured this one thing. It would all come together because I think it's going to be different based on every different therapeutic area and everything like that.
Absolutely.
I think another way to look at it maybe too is just within organizations having a common KPI that everybody agrees upon. Medical affairs touches R&D, marketing, sales, regulatory, everybody else. Right? But, and this is what I was saying at the very beginning, is there's no common way of measuring all this stuff. Let's say, hey, when I work with sales, I work with this, and when I work with R&D, it's this. But if we all got together and said, let's all measure this one KPI that we all can agree will actually change things for the company. And this is how we're all working towards that. And not just from strategy. I mean, whenever it's something that is a measurement. It's like literally is numbers game, right? We had that, then we'd all be on the same page. And it's like this peer pressure thing. Oh, hey, everyone's doing it, so we should get on board with this impact measurement as well. But if it was consistent, and I don't see that at all everywhere I worked, unfortunately, like I said, hey, when we work with this group, we measure it this way. I work with that group, we measure it a different way. But that inherently is part of the problem why we have this gap. Everybody looks at what we do differently and how they measure how we interact with them on an internal base. I'm not even talking outside the company, just internally. So if we had a way of doing a common KPI, so I would encourage leaders, look for that way to say, hey, if we all work towards this one KPI together, we can actually measure what we do very easily.
Yeah, because I think that the other thing that it does is it's not what is the impact of field medical and what's the impact of psychon and what's the impact of ops and we're all here to make one common impact, right? We're here to change these 4 beliefs, right? And we need the data and we need the publications and we need the Congress abstracts and we need the thought leader relationships and the education programs. Like all of those are just ways that we're all trying to do that. Right. Just thinking about the last 40 minutes or so, which went by really fast, by the way, Paul.
Yeah.
I think the big things I take away from this conversation. So first, measuring impact is a complex and long haul activity, right? This isn't something that can be flipped tomorrow. I think the next is to be really clear on purpose, right? We're not getting rid of activities, we're pointing them towards something. Like, what is it that we're trying to change? What is it we're trying to do so that we can then contextualize and say, are we spending our time? Are we prioritizing who we engage with? Are we spending the money the right way to do what we said we're trying to get done? And then it sounds like this last piece is to make sure that we continue to reinforce that as leaders, to make sure that we don't contradict ourselves and that we don't recognize and reward and celebrate the wrong things, and that 6 different stakeholders who all have expectations of us in medical aren't pulling in different directions because we're all aiming towards the same outcome.
Yeah, and maybe that's the new gold standard we should aim for, right? If you want to call it that, use that term. Activity for activity's sake is we should eliminate that. Look at ways of measuring those outcomes and not outputs so much, and combine the two together as a really a better way of looking at it. And like I said, I go back to medical affairs should be in the room and not just an approver or a way of saying, yes, this is scientifically sound, but really that partner. And this is what we need to be doing, and making those decisions in lockstep with everybody else.
Love it. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Can I put your LinkedIn and contact information there in the show notes if anybody needs to reach out and talk to somebody?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Very good. Have a great end to your summer here.
You do the same. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.